I pulled into my driveway after 2 weeks away, exhausted from the red-eye flight from Vancouver. My mother had suffered a stroke, and I'd been at her bedside through the worst of it. She was stable now, thank God, but I was desperate to get home to Margaret, my wife. She has early onset Alzheimer's, and 2 weeks apart felt like an eternity. The house was dark. That struck me as odd. It was only 8 in the evening, and Margaret usually kept the living room lights on. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and headed to the front door, fumbling for my keys. That's when I heard it. A faint thumping sound, rhythmic and desperate, coming from somewhere inside the house. My heart stopped. I shoved the key in the lock and burst through the door. The sound was clearer now. Someone was banging on something, and there was a muffled voice, hoarse and weak. It was coming from below, from the basement. I dropped my suitcase and ran to the basement door. It was locked from the outside, padlocked with a heavy-duty lock I'd never seen before. The thumping grew louder, more frantic. "Margaret!" I shouted, my hands shaking as I searched for something to break the lock. A cry came from the other side, weak, desperate. My wife. I ran to the garage, grabbed a crowbar, and pried that lock off in 3 violent yanks. The door swung open, and the smell hit me first. Urine, sweat, and something sour. I flicked on the light and nearly collapsed. Margaret was at the bottom of the stairs, filthy, trembling, her nightgown stained and torn. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding. She looked up at me with eyes that didn't quite recognize me at first, confusion and terror mixing in her expression. "Thomas," her voice cracked. Is that really you?" I was down those stairs in seconds, scooping her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing. How long had she been down here without food, without water? "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm here, I've got you." I carried her upstairs, my mind racing. Who did this? How did this happen? I laid her on the couch and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. As I gave our address to the dispatcher, I looked around the house. Everything seemed different. Furniture had been moved. There were boxes stacked in the corner I'd never seen before. Margaret's pill organizer was gone from the kitchen counter. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they checked Margaret's vitals, severely dehydrated, malnourished, early signs of hypothermia, despite it being September, I stood there in shock, trying to piece together what had happened. "Sir, when did you last see your wife?" one of the paramedics asked. 2 weeks ago. I left her with our daughter. Jennifer was supposed to stay with her while I was in Vancouver. My mother had a stroke, and my voice broke. "Jennifer did this?" The paramedic exchanged a glance with her partner but said nothing. They loaded Margaret onto a stretcher. I rode with her in the ambulance, holding her hand, whispering that she was safe now, that I was sorry, so sorry I'd left her. At St. Michael's Hospital, they admitted her immediately. A nurse pulled me aside while the doctors worked. "Mr. Holloway, I need to ask, has your wife been locked in that basement for the entire 2 weeks you were away?" The question hit me like a freight train. 14 days. My Margaret, trapped in that cold, dark basement for 14 days. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just found her like that." A police officer arrived an hour later. His name was Detective Morrison, Toronto Police Services, Elder Abuse Unit. Yes, there's actually a specialized unit for this. I sat in the hospital waiting room and told him everything. "I'm Thomas Holloway. I'm 65, retired from a career in civil engineering. My wife Margaret is 63. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. It's been progressing slowly, but she can still do most things with reminders and routine. She knows who I am. She knows our daughter. She just gets confused sometimes, forgets where she put things, loses track of time. Our daughter Jennifer is 38. She's a CPA at a mid-sized firm in downtown Toronto. She married Kyle 3 years ago. Kyle calls himself a business consultant, but I've never been entirely clear on what he actually does. He's always talking about cryptocurrency, NFTs, passive income streams. I never liked him, if I'm being honest, but Jennifer seemed happy, and that's what mattered. 2 weeks ago, my mother in Vancouver had a stroke. My sister called me in a panic at 3 in the morning. I booked the first flight out. Jennifer volunteered immediately to stay with Margaret while I was gone. "Dad, don't worry about a thing," she'd said. "I'll take care of Mom. You just focus on Grandma." I was grateful, relieved even. Jennifer knew her mother's routines, knew where all the medications were, knew how to handle the confusion and the sundowning that came with the disease. I called every day from Vancouver. For the first week, Jennifer answered, "Mom's fine, Dad. We're watching her favorite shows. I'm making sure she eats. Don't worry." But during the second week, the calls went to voicemail. She texted instead, "Sorry, busy with Mom. She's good. Call you later." But she never called back. I tried calling Margaret directly, but her phone went straight to voicemail too. I told myself it was fine. Jennifer had it under control. My mother needed me. I stayed in Vancouver. Detective Morrison listened to all of this, taking notes. Then he asked the question that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Holloway, during those 2 weeks, did you give your daughter power of attorney over your wife's affairs?" "No, absolutely not." "Did your wife sign any documents that you're aware of?" "Not that I know of." "Why?" He closed his notebook. "We'll need to investigate further, but Mr. Holloway, this appears to be more than just neglect. We'll be in touch." Margaret stayed in the hospital for 3 days. They rehydrated her, treated her for malnutrition and exposure, and ran a battery of tests. She kept asking where Jennifer was. "Where's Jenny? She was just here. She was making me lunch." No, sweetheart, she wasn't. On the second day, while Margaret was sleeping, I went home to look around more carefully. I needed to understand what had happened. What I found made me physically ill. The basement door had been padlocked from the outside. There was a bucket in the corner. That's what Margaret had used as a toilet. A thin blanket on the concrete floor. No food. No water. The light bulb had been removed from the socket. My wife, who sometimes forgets what day it is, but who can still laugh at silly jokes and loves watching the Blue Jays play, had been locked in darkness for 2 weeks. Upstairs, I found more disturbing evidence. Jennifer's laptop was still on the kitchen table, password conveniently saved. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I looked through her files. What I found was methodical, calculated, evil. There were scanned documents, power of attorney papers, with Margaret's signature, real estate documents, bank statements, and a file labeled Investment Opportunity, Kyle's Fund. I sat there for an hour, reading through everything, my hands shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. Here's what they'd done. The first week I was gone. Jennifer had taken Margaret to a lawyer's office, some sketchy notary in Scarborough, not our family lawyer. She'd had Margaret sign POA documents, using her Alzheimer's confusion to convince her it was just paperwork for Dad. The notary apparently didn't ask many questions. Margaret's signature was shaky, but recognizable. With that POA, Jennifer had accessed our bank accounts. She'd withdrawn $75,000 from our savings money we'd carefully set aside for Margaret's future care as her Alzheimer's progressed. She'd also taken out a home equity line of credit against our house for another $100,000. We'd owned our home in Leslieville outright for 20 years. Now we owed the bank $100,000. All that money, $175,000, had been transferred to something called Thornhill Capital Management. 3 clicks later, I discovered that Thornhill Capital was Kyle's company, a numbered corporation registered just 6 months ago. Its business? Cryptocurrency investment and blockchain consulting. In other words, Kyle was running some kind of crypto scheme, and they'd used my wife's confusion and my absence to fund it. But here's the part that made me want to vomit. They couldn't let Margaret talk to me. If I'd called the house, Margaret would have told me something was wrong. Even with her Alzheimer's, she'd know something wasn't right. So they needed to keep her quiet. Their solution? Lock her in the basement. I found a text exchange between Jennifer and Kyle from day 3. Kyle: "She keeps crying for your dad. This isn't going to work." Jennifer: "She'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps." Kyle: "What if someone checks on her?" Jennifer: "Who? Dad's in Vancouver. Mom's friends haven't visited in months because of her condition. We're fine." They'd planned this. They'd knowingly locked a confused, vulnerable woman in a basement to steal her life savings. I called Detective Morrison immediately. He came to the house with 2 other officers. I showed them everything: the laptop, the documents, the text messages, the state of the basement. "Mr. Holloway," Morrison said carefully, This is elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unlawful confinement. We'll need your wife's testimony when she's able, but there's more than enough here for charges. Where's my daughter now? I asked. We don't know yet. Do you have an address for her? I did. Jennifer and Kyle lived in a condo in Liberty Village, about 20 minutes away. Detective Morrison made a call, and within an hour, officers were dispatched to their address. They weren't there. But what the officers found in that condo would lead to even more charges. The place was nearly empty. Furniture was gone. Closets cleaned out. But in the trash, and this is where they got sloppy, officers found bank statements, paperwork for one-way tickets to Portugal, and a printed email from a property management company in Lisbon about a 6-month rental. They were planning to run, take the money, and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty for financial crimes. But they'd left too much evidence behind, and they'd underestimated how quickly I'd return. My mother's recovery was faster than expected, and I'd come home 3 days earlier than originally planned. If I'd stayed in Vancouver for the full 2 weeks as planned, Margaret might have died in that basement. Jennifer and Kyle would have discovered her body, played the devastated daughter, and been on a plane to Lisbon before anyone asked questions. Detective Morrison was blunt about it. Your early return saved your wife's life. That realization that my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd cried in my arms when her goldfish died when she was 7, had been willing to let her own mother die for money. I couldn't process it. The manhunt began. Toronto police issued warrants for Jennifer and Kyle. Their faces were on the news within 48 hours. Daughter and son-in-law wanted in elder abuse case. The media had a field day. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, reporters, neighbors, people from my old workplace reaching out. I ignored all of it. My focus was Margaret. She was released from the hospital on day 4, still weak but recovering physically. Mentally, though, she was confused. She kept asking where Jennifer was. Is Jenny coming for dinner? She'd ask. No, sweetheart. Not tonight. Did I do something wrong? Why won't she visit? How do you explain to someone with Alzheimer's that their daughter is a monster, that the woman she gave birth to, raised, and loved had locked her in a basement to steal from her? I couldn't. So I just held her hand and said, Jenny's busy right now, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. On day 6, Jennifer and Kyle were arrested at Pearson Airport. They'd tried to board a flight to London, England, their first stop before connecting to Portugal. Border services flagged them immediately. Detective Morrison called me within the hour. We've got them. They're in custody. I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just emptiness. The charges came down like a hammer. 2 counts of elder abuse, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, 2 counts of unlawful confinement, 2 counts of fraud over $5,000, and 1 count of forgery related to the POA documents. Kyle faced additional charges related to his investment fund, which turned out to be, surprise, a Ponzi scheme. He'd taken money from at least 30 other investors, all elderly or vulnerable people, promising 40% returns on cryptocurrency trades that never actually happened. He was just shuffling money around, paying old investors with new investor money. Classic fraud. The Crown attorney assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, met with me a week after their arrest. She laid out the case in detail. Mr. Holloway, this is one of the most egregious elder abuse cases I've seen in my career. The premeditation, the exploitation of your wife's cognitive condition, the financial devastation they caused, this is serious. We're pushing for maximum sentences. How long? I asked. Elder abuse with unlawful confinement, combined with the financial exploitation? We're looking at 8 to 12 years for Jennifer, 10 to 15 for Kyle because of the additional fraud charges. And the money? Patricia's expression softened. That's going to be harder. Kyle's fund is bankrupt. The money is gone, spent, moved offshore, or paid to early investors to keep the scheme running. We'll pursue restitution orders, but I want you to be realistic about recovery. In other words, the $175,000 was gone. Our savings, our home equity, vanished into Kyle's crypto scam. I asked the question that had been haunting me. Did she know? Jennifer, did she know what Kyle was doing was fraud? Patricia opened the evidence file. Based on the emails and texts we've recovered, yes, She knew. She helped him recruit investors, including two of her co-workers from her accounting firm. She created fake financial statements for the fund. She was an active participant. My daughter wasn't a victim of her husband's scheme. She was a co-conspirator. The bail hearing was painful. Jennifer's lawyer argued for release, pending trial, no criminal record, ties to the community, low flight risk despite the Portugal thing. The Crown argued the opposite, clear flight risk, destruction of evidence, ongoing danger to Margaret. The judge sided with the Crown. Bail denied. Jennifer and Kyle would remain in custody at the Toronto South Detention Center until trial. I attended that hearing. I sat in the back row and watched my daughter, in an orange jumpsuit, plead with the judge for release. She cried. She apologized. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. When she saw me, she tried to mouth something. "Dad, please." I stood up and walked out. I couldn't look at her. The criminal case moved forward, but I wasn't content to wait for justice from the courts alone. I hired a lawyer, Christopher Walsh, a partner at a firm that specializes in elder law and estate litigation. His advice was clear. "Thomas, you have grounds for a civil suit. Sue them for everything they've taken, plus damages for what they put Margaret through. Even if they don't have assets now, they might in the future, inheritance, earnings, property. Lock it down." I filed suit 2 weeks later. Jennifer Holloway and Kyle Morrison, defendants. Claims: financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty. Damages sought: $175,000 in stolen funds, plus $200,000 in additional damages for Margaret's suffering. But there was more to do. I contacted the College of CPAs of Ontario. Jennifer had used her credentials as an accountant to lend legitimacy to Kyle's scheme. Her co-workers from the accounting firm had trusted her professional judgment. She'd violated every ethical standard of her profession. I filed a formal complaint. Within a month, Jennifer's CPA license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal trial. If convicted, she'd be permanently disbarred. She'd never work as an accountant again. That should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It just felt necessary. The months that followed were a blur. Margaret's Alzheimer's worsened stress, accelerates cognitive decline, her neurologist told me. She stopped asking about Jennifer, which was somehow worse than the questions. It was like her brain had erased her daughter as a protection mechanism. I hired a full-time caregiver to help with Margaret while I dealt with the legal proceedings. The bills were piling up: medical expenses, legal fees, the mortgage payments on the HELOC we never wanted. We were drowning financially, and the people responsible were sitting in jail awaiting trial. The preliminary hearing happened in January, 5 months after Margaret's rescue. I testified. I walked the court through finding Margaret, through discovering the documents, through realizing what they'd done. Jennifer's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, too manipulated by Kyle, desperate for money, suffering from her own mental health issues. It was garbage, and the judge saw through it. "Miss Holloway," the judge said, "you are a trained accountant. You understood exactly what you were doing. You exploited your mother's cognitive vulnerability for financial gain. There is no mitigating factor that excuses that." The case was bound over for trial. Trial date set for June, 8 months after the nightmare began. But before the trial, something unexpected happened. Kyle's lawyer approached the Crown with a deal. Kyle would plead guilty to all charges and cooperate fully in testifying against Jennifer in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd testify that Jennifer had been the mastermind, that she'd planned the whole thing, that he'd just gone along with it. It was a coward's move, throwing his wife under the bus to save his own skin. But Patricia Chen called me to discuss it. If Kyle testifies, we have an airtight case against Jennifer. His testimony, combined with the evidence, guarantees a conviction and a strong sentence. What do you think? Will he serve time? I asked. Yes. We're offering 8 years, with eligibility for parole, after serving 2/3. He'll be in prison for at least 5 years, realistically longer. And Jennifer? Without the deal? She'd face trial, and there's always risk with a jury. But with Kyle's testimony, we'd push for the maximum 12 years. I thought about Margaret, still asking sometimes why Jenny doesn't call. I thought about those 14 days in the basement. I thought about the life savings. Gone. The home equity. Gone. The trust. Gone. Take the deal, I said. Kyle pleaded guilty in February. The sentencing hearing was brief. He expressed remorse. I'm sure his lawyer wrote every word. The judge was unimpressed. Mr. Morrison, you participated in a scheme that targeted vulnerable elderly individuals, including your own mother-in-law. You prioritized profit over human dignity. 8 years in federal prison. 1 down. Jennifer's trial began in June. It lasted 3 weeks. The Crown presented the evidence, the POA fraud, the bank transfers, the basement, the texts planning the Portugal escape. They called Margaret to testify. That was the hardest day of my life. Watching my confused, diminished wife try to explain what had happened to her. She kept getting mixed up, forgetting details, asking if she could go home. Jennifer's lawyer tried to use that confusion to suggest Margaret couldn't be a reliable witness. But then the Crown played the video. The police had taken video of the basement the day they'd executed the search warrant. That dark, cold space. The bucket. The thin blanket. The scratches on the door where Margaret had tried to claw her way out. The jury watched in silence. 2 of them were crying. Kyle testified next. He laid out the entire scheme, how Jennifer had approached him with the idea, how she'd researched the POA laws, how she'd found the notary who wouldn't ask questions, how she'd planned the timeline around my trip to Vancouver. It was all her, he said. I just did what she told me to do. Even if that was partly self-serving, the evidence backed it up. Jennifer's laptop showed she'd been researching power of attorney, elder exploitation, and countries without extradition weeks before my mother's stroke. She'd planned this. Jennifer took the stand in her own defense. It was a disaster. She tried to claim she'd been trying to help us, that Kyle had manipulated her, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. The Crown destroyed her on cross-examination. Miss Holloway, you texted your husband. She'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps. You were referring to your mother. What were you hoping she'd forget? Silence. Miss Holloway, you locked your mother in a basement without food or water for 14 days. You stole her life savings. You planned to flee the country. And you want this court to believe you never meant to hurt anyone? Jennifer broke down crying. The jury was unmoved. Deliberations took 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 2 months later. I submitted a victim impact statement, 5 pages, detailing what this had done to Margaret, to me, to our lives. How we'd lost not just our money, but our sense of safety, our trust, our family. Margaret tried to submit one too, but her Alzheimer's made it impossible. Her neurologist submitted a letter instead, documenting how the trauma had accelerated her cognitive decline. The judge read through everything. Then she looked at Jennifer. Miss Holloway, you are an educated, intelligent woman. You understood the vulnerability of your mother's condition, and you exploited it without conscience. You betrayed not just her trust, but every standard of human decency. This court sees no mitigating factors. Jennifer Holloway, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I exhaled. It was over. But it wasn't. Not really. The civil suit settled a month later. Jennifer and Kyle were jointly liable for $375,000. Of course, they don't have that money. The court put liens on any future assets, wages, or inheritance. If they ever have anything, we'll get it. But realistically, we'll never see that money. The restitution order from the criminal case says they owe us $175,000 plus interest. Again, good luck collecting. The house we managed to refinance the HELOC into our mortgage, but we now have payments for the first time in 20 years. We'll be paying this off for the rest of our lives. Margaret's care costs are climbing as her Alzheimer's progresses. Insurance covers some of it, but not all. I'm looking at possibly selling the house within a few years to afford memory care. Jennifer is at Grand Valley Institution for Women, about an hour west of Toronto. She'll be eligible for parole in 8 years. Kyle is at Joyceville, a medium-security prison near Kingston. His parole eligibility is in 5 years. I haven't visited. I won't visit. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a daughter anymore. People ask me sometimes if I regret pursuing the charges so aggressively, if I wish I'd tried to work it out as a family, if I think 12 years is too harsh. Here's what I tell them. Jennifer locked her confused, terrified mother in a basement for 2 weeks. She stole everything we'd saved to care for Margaret in her final years. She planned to let Margaret die and flee the country with the money. She did all of this knowingly, calculatedly, without conscience. 12 years isn't too harsh. It's mercy. Margaret doesn't understand where Jennifer is. Sometimes she still asks. I tell her Jennifer is away for work. It's easier than explaining the truth to someone who won't remember the explanation anyway. Last month, Margaret forgot who I was for the first time. She looked at me, really looked at me, and asked who I was and what I was doing in her house. It only lasted an hour before she recognized me again. But it's begun. The final stage. I think about that sometimes, how Jennifer stole not just our money, but our time. The time Margaret and I had left before the Alzheimer's took her completely. We should have spent those 2 weeks together. Instead, Margaret spent them in hell. That's what I can't forgive. The money can be replaced, eventually. The house can be sold. But those 14 days, and all the days after that were stolen by stress and trauma and fear, those are gone forever. So no, I don't regret the 12 years. I'd do it again. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. It's about saying, loudly and clearly, that some things are unforgivable. My daughter learned that the hard way. I hope everyone watching this story learns it the easy way. Your family's trust is sacred. Break it, and don't be surprised when the consequences break you in return. As for me and Margaret, we're still here, still fighting, still together. That's more than Jennifer wanted for us, and it's more than she'll have for the next 12 years. And honestly, that's the only justice that matters.